Okay.
Okay, all right, namaste. So today is our Ramayan day. So if you remember, we are towards the end of Kishkinda Kanda. So page number 279, who will cross the sea? The Vanars cheered Sampati on his way into the sky. He had not flown in for 1,000 years. They jumped up and down on that shore. Even when he had circled above them once and disappeared, flashing away like an astra, their joy did not wane, for they also celebrated the news Sampati had given them. At last they knew where Sita was, even if they did not yet know how to cross the dark sea that lay between themselves and her, because he could see Sita sitting in Ashok Vatika. Shouting and dancing as monkeys will, they leaped down from the embankment where Sampati had stood and went to the water's edge. They gazed out at the sullen silver crested expanse before them, and they felt somber and silent. The vista of waves was awesome, and they did not have eagle's eyes that they could discern Lanka anywhere, let alone Sita in her garden of confinement. Angad was quick to sense the despondency that gripped his people when they gazed out at the swollen waves. Turning away from that forbidding sight, he said to the Vanars, "Peering at the sea will serve no purpose. Our answer doesn't lie there, but within ourselves. We are tired. The day has been a long one, and we have knocked at death's door. Night is upon us, and this sand will serve as a soft bed tonight. When we wake up in the morning, we will think again of how to cross the ocean. Good night, my sweet Warners. Sleep in peace tonight, because fortune finally smiles on our enterprise." One by one, lulled by the drone of the waves, the Warners fell asleep. The moon rose regally behind them over the shoulder of the mountain. Long after the last Warner soldier was asleep, the leaders of that force sat huddled together around Angad, deliberating in quiet voices, voices the impossible task before them, to cross 100 yojans of water. Past midnight, when the moon was at his zenith, Angad, Hanuman, and the other chieftains also fell asleep. The beach presented a strange spectacle as Somdev passed above. Wrapped in his spectacle light, a teeming army of monkeys covered the white sands. The next morning, the Vanars rose with the sun's first rays slanting across their faces. They washed in their velvet sea, which lay like an interminable dream before them. There was no sign, even by daylight, of any southern shore of the ocean. No speck of island darted the vacant horizon. Standing on the embankment, Angad raised his arms to call his people to him. When they thronged around him, he said to them, "We are an ancient and magical race. Many of us have devas for fathers and grandfathers. Some say the roots of the tree of the race of Vanars plunge deeper into time than those of the tree of men. I want to know who among you can leap across this yawning sea, find Sita, and leap back again, 100 yojans, and death by drowning if you fail. Who can do it? Which of the Vanars will make the leap of faith?" Only the dawn waves washing ashore answered him. Angad's call echoed there, and the sea seemed to mock him. He cried again, "I know there are great heroes among you. Why have you all fallen silent? Let us hear of your prowess, Vanars. Let us hear how far each of you can leap." Gudge of the monkey folk raised his voice above the ocean's ceaseless roar. "I can leap 10 yojans." Gavaksh shouted, "With my ancestors' blessing, I can leap 20." Another Vanar cried, "And I 30." Thus they shouted their abilities one after another until one of the mightiest of them, Dvivid, cried, "I can jump 70 yojans." Jamvan, the old king of the Rikshas, the black bears, had journeyed from Kishikanda with the monkey force. Now he cried, "Once I made a pradakshina around our Lord. The dwarf Trivikram of the three strides, and that was a great way indeed. Now the journey of my life draws near its end, and I stand on the brink of another ocean and another shore. Yet for Ram, I will leap at least 90 yojans, even at my age. He paused in doubt. But 100? I wonder if I can leap 100, but if need be, I can try. Then Angad himself cried, I can cross the 100 yojans easily. His monkeys broke into loud cheers. He held up a hand for silence. But I don't know if I can come back again. Jamvan said, Angad, my child, I am certain you can cross to Lanka and back. Why, I'm sure you could fly 1,000 yojans, for aren't you great Vali's son? But this task is not yours. It's not for a crown prince to risk his life, leaping into a strange land ruled by a Rakshas. At once Angad's eyes welled up. He said gently, I thank you for your love, Jamvan, but who else will make this gravest leap? And you know it must be made. What is our solution, wise one? You think of a way. Jamvan said quietly, I shall, my prince. He turned to where a solitary wanderer sat upon a smooth rock. Outside the throng of monkeys around their leaders, Hanuman sat all alone, gazing out over the implacable waves. The son of the wind. Jamvan said to the moody Hanuman, Why, O son of the wind, do you doubt yourself so much? But it is the curse of all the greatest. Those who cannot do a tenth of what you can, those who haven't a shadow of your strength, stand up and boast about their prowess, while you sit here listening to them and say nothing. Hanuman, we need a hero to leap across the sea and bring glory to the Vanars. But Hanuman was so unconfident. He said with a nervous laugh, You have too much regard for me, good Jamvan. Do I indeed? Have you forgotten who you are, Vayuputra? Let me remind you of your ancestry and let these monkeys hear who our modest Hanuman truly is. Once Anjana, the Apsara of heaven, was born as a Vanari. She was so beautiful, the wild wind was smitten by her. She could not resist him either, for their love was destined. Jamvan grew thoughtful. Yes, just as it was destined that one day you would sit here on this shore, doubting yourself with all your heart. Even as Anjana lay in Vayudeva's coiling embrace, a voice spoke to her out of the sky. Anjana, a soul of matchless glory will be born as your son. He will have no equal in goodness or valor, wisdom or strength. Being his father's son, he will fly more swiftly than Garuda. You have forgotten who you are, Hanuman. You have forgotten how, when you were just a child, you leaped into the sky because you thought the sun was a fruit you could eat. You flew 300 yojans into the air. Indra thought you were arrogant and flung his thunderbolt of 1,000 joints at you. But son of the wind, the awesome weapon merely grazed your cheek. For Brahma had blessed you to be immune to every ayudh. When the Vajra fell away tamely, your people named you Hanuman, invincible one. Vayu was incensed at Indra, and he would not blow at all through the three worlds. At last, Indra realized it was only a child's fancy and not arrogance that had made you leap up like that. He was so charmed by your leaping for the sun that, laughing aloud at the thought, he also blessed you. He blessed you that you can summon your own death like a servant whenever you choose. Hanuman had risen behind Jamvan on that golden beach. Every word the king of bears said seemed to sever a link in the chain that bound his spear. His eyes shone, his back was very erect. Hanuman smiled, and his doubts left him like mist before the sun. Jamvan continued, We stand not just on the shore of a sea, but at the brink of despair. You are Vayu's son, powerful as the wind himself. Don't hesitate, Hanuman. Fate is calling you to make your name immortal. You are our hope. Only you can save us all from death. Shed your unconfidence. Your moment of glory has arrived. There was a stirring of air above them. The Varners sensed another implacable presence there. They huddled together and whimpered in fear, but caressed by his father's subtle fingers, Hanuman began to grow before the monkey's eyes. His body shone with uncanny splendor, and moment by moment, as if Jamvan's words had unleashed the Mahima Siddhi, Hanuman grew bigger and bigger still. As he grew, his expression also changed from despondency to one of imperturbable joy. Now grown into a gigantic savior of his race, he smiled benignly down at the astounded Vanars. He was tall as a hill. He was bright as the morning. He growled deep in his throat and shook his body like some unimaginable lion. The Varners clutched at one another for comfort. They no longer saw Sugriev's wise and gentle, faithful and quiet minister Hanuman. This was another elemental being who towered over them, his great eyes glowing. This was Hanuman, the wind's magnificent son, and the challenge of the sea was no longer as daunting as it had seemed. He was titanic already. Still he grew until it seemed to the monkeys, dwarfed at his feet, that the sun would ignite his mane. He was like some great flame, and he bowed to the monkey elders and to his prince Angad. When he spoke to them, his voice was thunder. Agni's friend Vayu is powerful, boomed that immense Vanar. He is tameless, and he pervades the universe. I am that Vayu's son. No one can leap as far as I can. I can fly 1,000 times around Mount Meru. I can fly around the world with the moon. It was as if a stranger spoke in their Hanuman's voice. The ocean trembled when he cried, "Do you know the strength of these arms with the sinews of the wind in them? I can thrust the mountains down in the earth and plunge the jungles into the sea. I can crush the greatest peaks into dust with my hands, and I, Hanuman, serve my Ram." The stupendous monkey smiled from ear to ear. "And now I will fly across this little sea to find Sita. I will cross the waves in a moment and carry her back to safety. If need be, I will draw Lanka up by its roots and bring it to Ram. I go now. I go." No monkey stood on that shore who was not slightly relieved that he went. Though he was always kindly, he was so awesome now they could not help being afraid of him. Yet they also rejoiced. Seeing him like that, they had no doubt that wherever she was, Hanuman would find Sita. It seemed that he was always intended to find her. None but he, only he had to be pushed to the edge of despair before he summoned this other Hanuman from within himself. This pristine Warner who neither doubted nor knew the meaning of fear. Jamvan, who alone was old enough not to be overwhelmed, cried, "We will wait upon this shore for you, son of the wind. Remember, our lives are in your hands." Hanuman smiled. "Fear not, uncle, great Jamvan. My prince Angad, give me leave. I go now to find Sita in Lanka, but the soft ground will be riven if I leap from here. I must climb to the top of Mahendra, where the rock is firm for 1,000 hands. From there I will fly and cause the earth no injury." With a few strides, climbing nimbly as monkeys do, he gained the summit he sought. His people stood on the beach below, watching him. He waved from his height, and it seemed to them he was bigger than the mountain. Far away were the eyes of the son of Anjana and the wind. In his mind, he had already reached Lanka and discovered Sita. With each foot on a different peak, he straddled Mahendra. Hanuman stood swaying in his father's lofty gusts, whistling around him in exhilaration. Back and forth he swayed, readying himself for the leap of 100 yojans across the fathomless sea. So this is the end of this Kand. And if you remember, this was a Kishkinda Kanda. I hope you remember the previous three Kands also. So good to memorize something like this, especially students like us who are studying this great scripture, Ramayana. See, there are two epics from India. One is Mahabharata, the other one is Ramayana. Okay, so Mahabharata has 18 parvs, And Ramayan has 7 kands. So first kand was Bal Kand. Second one was Ayodhya Kand. Third, Aryanyak Kand. And this fourth one, which we finished, Kishkinda Kand. Okay, try to memorize these names. Not difficult at all. Okay, and now we're going to start the Sundar Kand. Sundar Kand. And Sundar Kand, often people do a part of Sundar Kand during Navaratri. Sundar Kand. Okay, so that's what we are starting. If you don't have any question, I'll start with the first chapter, the leap of faith. Hanuman was a tremendous beast, straddling the Mahendra. As he craned toward the sky, the sinews on his neck and back stood out like cobras. Restlessly, the son of the wind paced the mountain top. Tigers, bears, and leopards that lived near the summit scurried out from their caves and fled down the mountain. This was not a monkey they would care to contend with. Mahendra, which stood unmoved by tidal wave and typhoon, shuddered beneath Hanuman's footfalls. Elephants blundered down the slopes. Gandharvas and Kinnars who lived in some of the caves flew into the air in flashes or fled with the animals. The mountain top swirled with gusts of wind as Vayu enfolded his son in his ears. No one had made this leap before. Only birds had ever gone this way to Lanka. Hanuman saluted the Lokpals, the guardians of the four quarters. He worshipped Surya, Indra, Varuna, and Kuber with folded hands. Again he turned to the east and worshipped his father Vayu. He thought of Ram and Lakshman. He prayed to them in his heart. He paid obeisance to the holy spirits of the rivers and the mother of them all, the ocean. He worshipped Varuna Deva. The trees on Mahendra shook at Hanuman's advent, and the mountainside was covered with a colorful mantle of flowers that fell from their branches. Still Hanuman grew as he paced the mountain summit. Rocks cracked under his feet, while the peaks echoed with his quest for an unyielding place from which to launch himself. Smoke issued from those cracks. Cowering in caves in the lower reaches for terror of the monkey, 100 hands tall, the animals of Mahendra gave throat to their fear. Some roared, some bayed, some howled, but they all huddled together. Tiger and deer, elephant and panther, the great bears of those hills, Jamwan's cousins and hissing, venom-spitting serpents. 1,000 flights of birds flew screaming from their nests in caves and crannies, and the sky was full of their dark, wheeling alarm. On the mountain summit, Hanuman paced and paced, gathering himself. It is said even the rishis of Mahendra scuttled off that massive and secret Vidyadhars flew into the sky and hovered there like strange birds to watch Hanuman's leap. Then the awesome Vanar stood still on a spot that did not give below his feet, as if it had once been created just for him. He turned his face to the sky and roared like the wild creature he was, lord of them all, while above him the sky recoiled at the sound. Behind him, longer than the longest, Hemdride, pulled out of its hole by Garud, his tail coiled and twitched with life of its own. Far below on the seashore, Angad's Vanars stopped their ears with their hands. When the echoes of his roar had died away, suddenly Hanuman squatted down. His hands rested on two jagged peaks beside him. He thrust his neck out at the sky. He shook the final shred of doubt from his head and turned his eyes across the endless sea. He drew a deep, deep breath and crouched, quivering in readiness. Godspeed, Hanuman, the Vanar army cried from below. He thundered at them like an arrow from Ram's bow. I fly to Lanka. If Sita is not there, I will fly to Devlok to seek her. A clap of thunder rent the air, and the Vanars below saw the most amazing sight they ever had. Swift and steep as a thought, gigantic Hanuman rose into the firmament. With him pulled up by their roots by his velocity, rose 1,000 flowering trees. as if to see him off on his auspicious journey and keep him company part of the way. Then their flowers fell out of the sky in a cascade, an enchanted shower onto the calm sea. The waves washed ashore in every color imaginable, and they carried their soft cargo to the sands at the feet of Angad and his army. But above them, Hanuman did not fall back to the earth. Up he flew and away, carried by the power unleashed by his mighty legs and arms, borne on the swift currents of his father the wind, truly like the Manavastra of Ram of Ayodhya. They heard the peals of the exuberant laughter floating down like more blooms from the sky. Like a thunder cloud sped along by a tempest, Hanuman flew through the air. His arms were stretched before him like two streaks of lightning. The Devas saw his flight and gathered on high to watch. On flashed the Varner, and they whispered among themselves in awe, the immortal ones. They said he might swallow the very sky with his cavernous mouth. Hanuman's shadow on the placid ocean was 30 yojans long. As he flitted across the firmament like a mountain in the days before Indra sheared their wings. Through fleecy clouds, like a plunging moon, he flew, and eager for his success, the Devas showered unearthly petal rain over him. Not wanting him burned, the sun shone softly on his back as he arrowed along. And of course, his father Vayu held him precious in his arms, heart to heart. Never before had he felt his son so near him, so much his own, and he sped him on with a timely gust. Varun, the ocean below, watched Hanuman's flight and thought, I would not exist but for the Ikshvaku kings, and this monkey flies on a mission for the finest prince of that line. I will give him a place to rest on, and then he can gain his destination with ease. Varun summoned Himalaya's son, Menak, who lay submerged deep below his waves. The Lord of Waters cried to the mountain, rise up into the air, become a resting place for Hanuman. That legendary mountain with the peak of gold for which he was called Hiranya Nab, ploughed up like another sun rising after the sea, and stood gleaming in Hanuman's path. But the son of the wind thought Menak was a demoniacal obstacle, and with a nudge of his chest thrust him aside. Suddenly Menak's spirit appeared on his golden pinnacle, refulgent before the flying Vanar. Menak cried to the monkey, Varun bade me rise to be a resting place for you. The Lord of Waves would like to be of use to you, Hanuman, and to the prince of the house of the sun whom you serve. Your father Vayu saved me from Indra's Vajra when the Devas king severed the wings of all mountains. The wind hid me under the ocean when Indra hunted my kind. Look, and silver wings shimmered behind that resplendent wing. Menak said again, come, Hanuman, rest a while upon me. Then you can fly to Lanka from my summit. Hanuman replied, I am moved by your love and by the ocean's kindness, but my time is short and I have none to rest. Farewell, good mountain, we shall meet again someday. Hanuman waved to the golden one as Menak sank under swirling waves again. The Vanar streaked on through the sky, but then the Devas of light are never content to leave any hero untested in his most difficult hour. They called Suras, who is the mother of all serpents. The Deva said, we want to see how great this monkey really is. He is the wind's son. Just this leap is too easy for him. But we can test his mettle if we find someone dreadful in the sky barring his way. Become a Rakshasi in the air, Sursa. Let us see how worthy Hanuman truly is. Soon spread across the sky like a thunderstorm. Hanuman saw a Rakshasi who dimmed the brightness of the sun. She grinned, bearing fangs big as hills. She licked her lips when she saw him and bellowed, how hungry I have been! But here comes a fair feast flying into my mouth. Come to me, little ape, and be my lunch. Hanuman folded his palms to the awful one. He said humbly, Devi, I am on a sacred mission. On my way back, I will fly into your mouth. You have my word. But she cried, By Brahma's boon, no one can pass me without going through my mouth. Brahma's boon shall not prove false. She yawned, her mouth wide as the horizon. Exasperated, Hanuman cried, Rakshasi, your mouth is too small to contain me. Open wider so I can fit in it. She yawned, her firmament on a mouth still wider. She let it gape 100 yojans. In a flash, Hanuman was the size of a man's thumb. And before the demoness realized what was happening, he flashed in and out of her plumbless maw. Outside its darkness again, Hanuman grew vast once more. He bowed to Sursa. I flew into your mouth. Now let me pass. Sursa laughed. She liked this clever monkey in the sky. She cried to him, Pass in peace, Hanuman. It was only the Devas testing you. May your journey be fruitful. May all your mission succeed. She vanished out of the sky and Hanuman flew on. His path was many thousands of feet high. It was the skyway of the birds he flew along, the subtle path of rishis and gandharvas. Vayu had wafted his son up to where he flew as swiftly as he wished. It was a damp today, the celestial skyway, and raindrops fine as dew moistened his face pleasantly as Hanuman flashed along. Farther ahead, there was a real Rakshasi called Simika who lived in the ocean. Suddenly, Hanuman felt himself slowing and then coming to a standstill in the air. He felt himself being dragged down, and when he looked at the sea below, he saw that a Rakshasi's curved claw clutched his shadow on the water. Even as he watched, amazed, she parted the sea like another mountain and rose, lion faced and terrible, out of the waves. Her mouth yawned from horizon to sky to swallow him. Now Hanuman lost his patience. With a roar, he plummeted down into her jaws like a fishing hawk. Down her throat he plunged, becoming tiny again so she could not find him with her fangs. Down into her belly he flew. Beginning to grow again, he clutched 2 handfuls of her intestines and flashed back up again, dragging her stomach and through her mouth. Simika died screaming, and her entrails floated like dark garlands on the waves. Like Garud himself, Hanuman flew on, and the wind flew with him, making his passage effortless. He saw a dark speck appear on the horizon, and at the speed at which he flew, it grew rapidly. Soon a lush island lay below him, a jewel in the sea. Within its undulated green confines, he saw a mountain that thrust its way up toward the clouds, and the sun dappled gardens of that mount Trikuta. Lower and lower he circled. He saw rivers, streams, and silvery waterfalls. He wondered at the richness of this Lanka he had reached after flying 100 yojans through the sky. Quickly, Hanuman thought, I cannot land here like this. I am so big. The Rakshas will never let me into this city without a fight. Then how will I find Sita? In the twinkling of an eye, he was a little monkey 3 feet high, and softly he set himself down on the peak of the Lamb hill, round eyed at the beauty of Ravan's island. Hanuman stood chattering approvingly at what he saw around him. He heaved a sigh of relief that his fantastic journey, his momentous crossing, was accomplished. To find Sita now should be no great matter. Okay? See, we never knew the details of this. We thought that Hanuman just went there, right? So in order to do the seva, there's always some obstacles also. Because that's what he was doing. He was serving his Lord, the seva. But then he had the blessings also. And before he started, he prayed also. So we learn a lot from this. Okay, any question, comment? Otherwise, I will continue with the Hanuman's his how he describes how beautiful Lanka is and what he saw over there. But first, outside of that Lanka, there was a Lankini, a Rakshasi over there. So that's what this chapter is, Lankini. He had achieved the impossible, but the Vanar was humble and he did not waste any time admiring what he had done. Indeed, apart from profound relief that he had not failed, Hanuman felt little else. That was his nature. In the distance on the hill called Trikut, he saw Ravan's city basking in the light of the afternoon sun and set out toward it. On his way, he marveled at the lushness of Lanka. He walked through thick grasslands full of life and swung his way through woods of flowering trees of fragrances he had never known before. To be safe, Hanuman had landed quite away from the Rakshas city, and now he needed to cover a fair distance before he arrived at his destination. Gazing around his bright eyes, Hanuman loped along toward Ravan's city. The sun was sinking on the horizon when through the trees ahead of him he saw its scarlet and golden shafts reflected from the crystal windows of the mansions of Lanka. He saw the deep moat that encircled the fortress city in protection, the vigilant patrols of Rakshas that guarded its entrances, the wide, clean roads that wound their way into the lofty gates, and he was all admiration for what he saw. Hanuman had the feeling that Lanka must be as beautiful as Indra's Amravati, and he was not far wrong. Vishwakarma himself had built this city for Ravan. At the foot of the Trikut hill, Hanuman paused. Above him, in the evening mists that had gathered around it, the Rakshas city seemed to float on air. Lost in thought and in the grandeur of this Lanka before him, wondering what manner of demon its king was, who lived in such splendor, yet could stoop to abduct Sita. Hanuman came to the city gates. The Rakshas who stood guard, they were 10 feet tall. They were fierce and carried weapons of fire, nestling at their sides like organs of their bodies. There were so many of them outside the gates, hundreds, and Hanuman saw there were twice that number within. He thought that not even the Vanar army, if it ever arrived here, could hope to fight their way past that guard. He saw every man of it was a veteran of many wars. All of them were shining battle scars like ornaments on their arms, faces, and deep chests. The Vanar thought, how ferocious they look. Not even Indra's devas could pass these Rakshas. Then, most awful thought of all, will even Ram be able to fight his way into Lanka? For sure, no more than 4 of our Vanars can make the leap across the sea. Angad, Neel, Hanuman, and Sugriv, our king. He was perturbed, but he decided firmly that he would not be swayed by his branching anxieties. He would first tackle the immediate task at hand, to find Sita. Hanuman wasn't sure how to proceed and he felt fear fluttering in his belly. If he was not absolutely careful, and very lucky as well, all would be lost and his great leap would have been in vain. Even if she was in the city and still alive, how would he be able to meet her alone? The fear flared across his mind that after all, Ram might have to return to Ayodhya without Sita. Hanuman shivered. He scolded himself and swore he would be calm. He decided he would enter Lanka after nightfall. Night fell, under cover of darkness. He climbed into the middle branches of a tree, sat hugging himself for the coldness in his heart, and watched the sunset in the ocean. The last sliver of a crescent fireball sank below the horizon, and the sea was languid as a woman after love, like a shroud pulled over her face before she slept. Night stole over her and wrapped her in darkness. Hanuman roused himself and decided he was still too big to pass unnoticed into Lanka. He made himself smaller still. He shrank into a marmoset-sized monkey, no bigger than a kitten. Once more he crept to the gates of Lanka and hidden in the shrubbery. peered into the wondrous city. It was like a city of Gandharvas. Lights were everywhere, glimmering jewels paved the road and encrusted the walls of the houses. Lanka lay before Hanuman like a piece of rich tapestry. As if to help him, the moon rose over the trees and ramparts into a sky full of stars. Like a king, Swan Somdev was among lotuses on the dark lake above. A high gleaming wall ran around Lanka, made of some unearthly metal. To smooth it was impossible to scale. Hanuman stood gazing at it, and it confirmed his fears that Lanka would be hard indeed to breach, protected by the sea, a moat, ferocious Rakshas, and this wall that a fly could not cling to. Hanuman thought gloomily, I won't be able to deceive this eagle eyed guard if I assume the form of a Rakshas. What a city this is! Not even my father Vayu could enter it without Ravan's leave. He counted on his fingers the Vanar warriors who were strong enough to storm Lanka. Kumbad, Angad, Sushen, Menda, Dvividh, Sugriva, Kushparva, Ketumal, Hanuman, and Jamvan, Lord of Bears. Ram and Lakshman would come too, though he could not imagine how they would arrive here. But what could this mere handful do against the might of Lanka's Rakshas army? Hanuman shivered again with a chill in his heart. He came to a drawbridge across the moat, guarded by another force of Rakshas. He crept stealthily along its underside and gained the far bank in the moonlight. He crept along another 100 feet when suddenly he heard a hiss in the dark, and a powerful hand snatched him up by the scuff of his neck. Two crimson cat's eyes glared at him from the shadow he was snatched into, and dimly before him he saw a luminous and dreadful female form. It was a secret goddess who had caught him. Amused but menacingly, she said, What have we here? It seems to be no warrior, but only a little monkey. But not everything is what it seems to be, and you are very heavy for one so small. Who are you? And why are you trying to creep into Lanka? Don't lie to me. I saw you crawling under the bridge. The necklace of rubies at her throat glowed like embers in the night. Hanuman pretended to be a terrified little monkey. He trembled in her grasp and whimpered, I will tell you, beautiful one. I will tell you, but who are you, Devi? And why do you terrify me with your fierce eyes and your deep voice? As you can see, I am only a little monkey. But who are you? And why do you stand here in the dark at Lanka's gate? She shook him. She bared pale fangs and said, I am the spirit of Lanka. I am Lankini, and no one may pass me, for I am the guardian of Ravan's city. Prepare to die, monkey. I will pluck your head from your neck with my nails. Hanuman said, I saw the beauty of Lanka from yonder peak, and I was so enchanted that I came to see it nearer. But she was unmoved by his flattery. Her eyes glinting, she snarled, Foolish monkey, you cannot pass into Lanka unless you vanquish me in battle. Hanuman pleaded, I will admire the sights of Lanka and go away as I came. I mean no harm to anyone. With a soft howl, she struck him across his face. Then Hanuman lost his temper. Bunching his tiny paw into a fist, he struck her back squarely on her mouth. Her eyes rolling up, she crumpled to the ground. Yet since she was a woman, Hanuman had not hit her with all his strength. Soon she fluttered open her eyes and, shaking her head to clear it, sat up. But now she folded her hands to Hanuman and spoke to him in awe. So the prophecy has come true, whispered dusky Lankini. Brahma gave me a boon and said I would be invincible at these gates. But he also said that one day a little monkey would come along, and when he struck me down, I would know the end of the Rakshas was at hand. Her voice fell lower. and I know what brings you here. It is she, it is Sita who brings doom to Lanka. Hanuman saw she was crying. With a sigh, Lankini gathered herself up and said, "It is no use my standing guard here any longer. Lankini does not bar your way anymore. You are free to enter as you please." Her red eyes streaming, the fierce guardian melted into the night. She left the gates of Lanka forever. So, this is the end of this chapter. Any question? No? I think you're really enjoying the details of it. So, let me continue. So, one more chapter we'll read. Lanka. Great Hanuman, the tiny monkey, leaped nimbly onto the glassy wall around Lanka. For a moment he perched there, admiring the city that lay below him. Then, hardly able to find a firm foothold, he jumped down on the other side into Ravan's capital. In quaint adherence to what the Shastra said, he landed on his left foot, as it was written one should when entering an enemy's house or his country. So our scriptures, they say that whenever you are entering into your own home or doing something good, enter with the right foot in. Okay, so he's going to enemy's court with the left foot. That's how we do. So it's again a tradition. All around he heard music of the night's carousers, string and wind instruments and soft drums. From the windows of mansions so sublimely conceived they were magical, he heard a tinkling symphony of little bells of different pitches. They were hung out to sound in the wind in their thousands, so all the city was alive with their charmed song. Hanuman fetched a sigh when he saw the wonder that was Lanka. Not for a moment was there any doubt that the city of lights had been created by a divine craftsman. Its every mansion and street, all its grand and subtle design. Hanuman leaped onto the roof of a dwelling so tasteful you could almost say nature herself had colluded in its construction. So serene, so effortless were its lines. He saw every home was different from the others, each as elegant as the next, everyone a work of art. There was simplicity here in quite abundance, but no wealth was lacking either from the houses and the streets of Lanka. Hanuman saw precious jewels that made his eyes grow round. He saw doors and at times whole walls of painted silver and burnished gold. He jumped lightly from roof to roof, everywhere like an accompaniment to the little bells. He heard another ubiquitous tinkling of the anklets the women of Lanka wore. He heard the rustling of their silken garments as they embraced their husbands or their lovers. He peered in through windows, the sea breeze blowing round his ears by the butter lamps of the night, or by moonlight that streamed onto beds of entwined love. He saw that the Rakshas of Lanka were a noble and handsome people. Their tall women were tender as lily stalks, their men were virile warriors. Hanuman heard another eminent harmony of sighs and moans woven into the bells and the music. As the night advanced, this rhapsody swelled. Another noise attracted him, and he scrambled across the roofs. Round eyed, he saw a quarter of worship where solemn Brahman priests, all Rakshas, ceaselessly chanted the Vedas. Hanuman sat listening to the chaste recitation and to the waves far below in the bay, washing upon Lanka's golden beaches. Suddenly he heard the tramp of military feet in the street below and drew back into the shadows. It was Ravan's vigilant night patrol. This was no merely formal force, but a powerful contingent of war. Hanuman saw the glinting weapons those Rakshas carried, macabre ayuds in which dark fires slumbered. He did not like to think of what these demons would do to an intruder who fell into their hands. He shivered on his perch when they chatted quietly or smiled. Saber like fangs gleamed on the Rakshas' bold, sensual faces, and wiry mustaches bristled. From roof to roof sprang Hanuman, until, like a silvery hallucination before him, he saw Ravan's palace silhouetted against the slipping ocean. It was as if a small slice of another supernal world had fallen into this one. Shimmering towers and turrets reached for the stars on their way across the sky. They, that palace by itself was as large as a fourth of the rest of Lanka, perched on a hill of its own, as if it to complement the spirit of him who lived in it. All of Ravan's palace had just a single motive. It reached out to the constellations above, to whatever lay beyond its grasp. In constant yearning, it sought anything that was alien and majestic, just to touch, perhaps, to enrich itself with a caress, but then more likely to conquer as well. Within that great palace, Hanuman sensed as implacable evil a quenchless thirst to dominate. Through a golden gate set with corals and pearls bigger than any he had ever seen, he stole on tiny feet into the Antapur, Ravan's harem. The jewels reflected Somadeva's light back to him in quiet iridescence. Incense hung in the cool air laden with distant breeze blown dreams from the sea. In some rapture, Hanuman stood gazing at the crystal city below, where now the revelers and the musicians fell quiet and began to seek sleep or love. As he watched from Ravan's roof, looming over the rest of Lanka, he saw the Rakshas turn their lamps out one by one, and just the little bells still tinkled into the midnight breeze. But it seemed the revelry in the king's palace had only begun. Ravan had more than 100 guests tonight, and their celebrations in an enclosed garden and one of the glittering pavilions leading out into it were far from over. Food, delicacies of all kinds, was kept warm with burners under silver dishes so the guests could eat whenever they chose to. There was wild game and catch from the sea, and other meats, the scents of which Hanuman had never smelled. He did not like to think what they were. All the guests were obviously from the Rakshas nobility. They were taller than the others in the city outside, finer featured, more richly attired. The ornaments these Rakshasas wore would rouse the envy of the Apsaras in Devlok. Hanuman saw the women of Lanka were hardly less beautiful than he imagined the starry nymphs to be. Some were fine boned and ethereal, others were more sensuous and earthly, but so seductive that even the little Vanar in the terrace shadows sighed to look at them. The nobles of Lanka were both dark and fair, and some surely had very mixed blood. Some of them had blue eyes and hair shot with auburn with gold. The sprawling garden was dotted with clear spots, clear pools, and Hanuman saw that already many of the revelers had peeled off their clothes and swam, naked men and women together, laughing. Wine flowed there, and no Rakshas was sober anymore. In some amazement now, Hanuman of the jungle watched them as they peered off and wandered to quiet corners, where, with silver light streaming down on their beautiful, powerful bodies, they began to make love as unashamedly as animals of the jungle. Only, thought Hanuman, most wild beasts prefer privacy when they mate and enjoy it much more than these demons did their vacuous promiscuity. Then his fur stood on end, and his eyes stared in shock. He saw couples wander across to others and lie with them, 4 and 6 together, like nests of serpents, thought Hanuman, shuddering. Soon all Ravan's secluded garden writhed with naked Rakshas and Rakshasas at their soulless orgy under the trees and on the grass and even in the bathing pools of the perfumed garden. From his windy height on the palace of roof, Hanuman scrutinized every woman's face and he heaved a sigh of relief. Though the Rakshasas were beautiful, without exception, there was no doubt in the Vanar's mind that none of these, whose bodies shone in the flowing moon, was Sita. No, her beauty would far surpassed the superficial charms of these women. Hers had to be an altogether more spiritual loveliness. Ram had described her to him, and an image of her face was engraved on Hanuman's heart. He was certain he would know her as soon as his eyes saw her. He turned away from the garden of lust and through an open window crept into Ravan's palace. Golden were its halls and its thrones. An opulence of jewels encrusted the ivory and sandalwood seats, beds, and couches with which the countless lofty rooms were furnished. When he had roamed through the fine maze of corridors and apartments in one Antapur, Hanuman emerged into the courtyard of another. He gasped. Their glinting gemstones of fascination that twinkled back at the stars in subtle converse was a great ship of the sky, the Pushpak Viman. It was a mysterious disk, wrought in Devlok. 10 crack guards, more dangerous looking than any he had yet seen, stood watch over the uncanny craft, which seemed so strangely alive. Hanuman scrambled quietly into the adjoining Antapur, which he had yet to explore for Sita. Again, rooms branched endlessly from the labyrinthine passages. Hanuman eased open numberless doors, one after another, and gazed at the sleeping women within. Each was as beautiful as the others were. None was as beautiful as he knew Sita must be. Through Ravan's endless harem padded Hanuman, the little monkey, son of the wind, in quest of the peerless Sita. Now and again the night's stillness was broken by the whinnying of a horse from the demon's stables. If there were 100 women's apartments in each Antapur, there seemed to be 100 Antapurs in Ravan's palace. Passing his hands in wonder over walls of smooth silver and doors of solid gold, Hanuman patiently searched them all. He found the Lord of Lanka was a collector not only of Rakshasas. Some wings of the harem was full of sleeping Gandharv women, lovely beyond belief. Their hair glimmered with the natural starlight that is their elfin heritage, and their gossamer skins seemed to be woven from moonbeams. In other antapurs slept strong-limbed Kinnar women with high cheekbones, whose men are centaurs. In yet other apartments were chambers full of green and serpentine Nag women, sinuously exquisite with jewels embedded in their sleeping heads. It struck Hanuman that all these women were Ravan's lovers. It did not seem to the Vanar they were restrained here as captives. They slept much too languorously. Hanuman thought, what a king this Rakshas must be. However, grudgingly, he felt a stab of admiration for Ravan. The little monkey shook his head at the ways of fate. Here was a sovereign who had delectable mistresses from every race in the three worlds, yet he chose to court death at Ram's hands. And Hanuman believed that, however impossible it might seem to him just now, death would come ineluctably for Ravan. This is the end of this chapter. Let's stop it here. I think it's time. So, any comment, question? Beautiful details, but all